Hello, everybody. Let me just begin by saying that an hour was not all that was lost last night. Everybody's already giving me such grief because I didn't say anything at the early service. I was trying to keep all that nonsense out of our reverent time, but I must admit I'm mourning the Duke loss much greater than I am the hour of time for sure. So it's all right. It's all right. We digress. We are preparing for Easter, and that is our posture in the series we're calling I Am. And this is taken from, I'm really grateful for Tony. We were, Tony Ripa, we were in a meeting talking about just some of the series. He said, what if we looked at these 7 statements, 7 things that Jesus said that he is? I am the light of the world, and I am the bread of life. And what if we looked at those? And I'm grateful because I don't know that I would have ever looked at all these things in connection. And then with that, we've been reading through the book of John as the journey toward the cross in our devotions. And so this morning we're going to be looking at this section from chapter 9 and chapter 10 of the book of John. And this was actually your reading from last week. Tony's done a great job writing all those. But part of what is revealed to us in John is when Jesus is before the Pharisees and they're having this exchange about Abraham, and the Pharisees are like, our father is Abraham. We have no father but him. And Jesus is like, I know Abraham. And they're like, what? And Jesus makes this statement in John chapter 8. He says, before Abraham was, I am. And he's using this language very intentionally as a direct quote from Exodus chapter 3, where God reveals himself to Moses as by his name, his personal name, that I am who I am. My name is I am that I am. You tell them that's who sent you. And so this was the name that was long used by the Jewish culture that became Yahweh. And Jesus is saying, that's who I am. That's what he was saying in that moment. That's why they wanted to stone him. That's ultimately why he was crucified, was for blasphemy, for claiming to be God when they didn't think there was any way that could be the reality. So make no mistake, that's what's happening in this. Now, in our culture, there's a ton of, it's kind of a faddish to deconstruct your faith, right? To make it like, I'm just breaking down everything and everything's wrong and just kind of getting rid of everything, just deconstructing everything. And it's a big trend, particularly in a lot of Christian circles. And, my own journey with that kind of angst wasn't so much a deconstruction as much as it was a pursuit of something that I believed was there. And I think that's what most people's approach is. And, it's interesting to me. People used to ask me all the time, they would, about the gospel. And somewhere around 2004, 2005, I had this kind of crisis of belief. And as you walk with the Lord, you will inevitably have a crisis of belief. You're going to confront things or see things that you go, how can this be? And it's going to threaten your faith. And you're going to think that perhaps you don't believe certain things anymore, but that's probably not true. You just have to see beyond, see through them, and persevere in them. And you'll be amazed at what opens up in front of you. So those of you who are wrestling with your faith and sort of the deconstruction, I want to invite you to see this a little bit differently. See something unfolding in front of you. It's a much richer journey, and I think one you'll actually find the truth that perhaps you're looking for. And this has been my own journey of the gospel and trying to understand what it is that Jesus came to do for us. And the reason I say this is because as we prepare for Easter, we are going to celebrate something that we are very familiar with, the resurrection of Jesus. Like most everybody has heard that idea. We understand what it means. Jesus was crucified on a cross, he was in a tomb, and then he came out of the tomb. He was alive. And other than that, we don't really have a way to talk about why this matters to us, except when it comes to what happens to you after you die. And that's what most everybody believes about the gospel or being a, quote, Christian. That being a Christian really hinges on some eternal destination with some moral implications here on earth. And part of what I want for us to do, and we've been doing this as a staff, is to give ourselves permission to notice some things, to see some things, and to notice things and to be okay with not understanding them yet. So what most of us do when we're learning, when we're younger, we learn, when we're seeing all these things and everything's new. And you notice everything. You know, my granddaughter is not quite 2 years old, and it's you know, she points everything. Yellow. I mean, every time she's a color, blue, she's pointing. She's constantly learning and growing and seeing and noticing things. And somewhere along the way, we learn or we see enough, and then we start seeing everything through the lens of what we already see. And we stop observing and we stop noticing things. And the reason oftentimes that when we do see things or notice things that we don't understand, we just dismiss them because we don't have any bandwidth to try and understand anything else. And what ends up happening is you end up seeing everything new through the lens of what you already see and what you already believe. And we actually stop growing. We stop pursuing this. This is where it gets really frustrating. And so we often dismiss things that we notice that we don't really understand. And what I want for us to have permission to do is to notice some things without immediately having to understand them, to actually notice and observe them and talk about what we observe about them, what we see about them. That's what Jesus is doing for us in these statements, these metaphors of bread and light. And today we're going to look at this idea. He's the gate for the sheep. These are not obvious things to us. We have to see what it is that we're seeing. But make no mistake about this. Jesus isn't just revealing himself in clever teaching or something to apply to your life. He's revealing himself to you as God. This is God revealing himself to us, right? God in the flesh, the creator within creation, in order to redeem and to make available the rebirth of the life for which you and I have been intended. This is what we mean by life with God. And so I want us to look today in John chapter 10. We'll actually start in chapter 9. But a lot's been made, and we talk about, how do you know, when Jesus is saying he's God and he's the only way to God, he's the only way to God because he is God. And so what's interesting, this is, the verses that are used, when people ask, like, Mike, do you believe that there's one way to get to heaven? And this is what I grew up, that's the question. And we often use this verse, this proof text, as a way to say, yes, there's only one way to get to heaven, and it's Jesus. The problem is this verse doesn't actually say that. And it's because we already believe certain things and we already think certain things that we just overlay. We take what we hear and observe and we cram it in to what we already believe or think that we've seen. And we don't see anything new or different. And so when Jesus was with his disciples, he says, I'm going away to prepare a place for you. And I will come and take you so you can be with me where I am. And they said, we don't know where you're going. How can we know the way? And then Jesus answers this in John chapter 14, 6, very famous verse. I am the way, the truth, and the life. And no one comes to the Father but through me. Right? Very clear. Notice what he did not say. I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no one gets into heaven but through me. He doesn't say that. And what you have to observe is what he is interested in doing, what he is talking about, is bringing us back into the relationship with the God for whom we have been created, whose image we have been made. It forces us to think about this different. This isn't just about you going somewhere when you die. That's not untrue, it's just not complete. It's to be reunited and reconciled to the God for whom you have been created. That's what he's saying. That's a much different thing than just checking a box. You have some sense of eternal security if something were to happen to you. This actually has to do with how you arrange, how you live your life, the things you love, the things you want, the things you pursue. To live in a relationship for which you have been created, for which the promise is this is the way in which you will find life. And that's what we're going to look at today and see this. In fact, if you keep reading, what you see is this. I'm the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father but through me. Verse 7, if you really know me, you will know my Father as well. From now on, you do know him and you have seen him. Why? Because Jesus is God. That's exactly what he's saying there. I mean, this has been a wrestle for me for a long time. I get the Trinity and God the Father. This is in the passage where he's about to introduce them to the idea that he's going away and God's Spirit is going to be with us. He's going to fulfill this promise that he made. And so it's all this thing. And this is actually how Jesus presents all this. It changes or shapes the way that we do everything, including studying the scriptures, including how we view and are a part of his church. And so, John chapter 5, the Pharisees are the religious leaders. They study the Torah, like they know the old covenant. They consider themselves, descendants of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. All this is their kind of wheelhouse. And there's an exchange with them that John records a few chapters earlier, John chapter 5. And Jesus says this to the Pharisees: you study the scriptures diligently because you think that in them you have eternal life. These are the very scriptures that testify about me. I've spent the last 20 years trying to wrestle with how seriously I'm willing to take what Jesus said. I've studied the Bible most of my adult life, and relatively intentionally. And I have found things in there that I like, and I search the scriptures to say, if I can apply this to my life, then I'll have what I'm looking for. And then you put the God tag on it. There are places where I diligently tried to get God to give me life on my terms. And then I'll do for him whatever is good for him. And then we can make it like a sort of a quid pro quo exchange. That's what the old covenant was about. If you do this, I'll do that. And Jesus came to inaugurate a whole new way, to bring something new to bear. You diligently search the scriptures because you're trying to figure out how to have life, right? And we do this. And then he goes on and he says, yet you refuse to come to me in order to have life. This is a tension throughout the New Testament. It's a tension today in our world. It's a tension, if I'm honest, in my life, because there are times when I want to find my way of life, to preserve and protect my way of life. And it ultimately has to do with the things that I'm able to do to control my life. Like the human dream, the fallen human dream, is to have what you want, when you want it, without having to depend on anyone else. Isn't that it? That's why you have a lottery list, right? If you win the lottery, what would you do? You would do what you want, when you want it, and you wouldn't have to depend on anybody else for anything. That's why I wouldn't even work, right? That's why we have this, because that's our heart sort of inclined in this direction just by its nature, in a sense. And so this is what he's getting. He says it's easier and more desirable to control than it is to trust. And so we have to get ourselves thinking about this. And so I got to begin today, starting in John chapter 9. This is just an incredible story. Jesus' disciples are walking along, and they encounter a blind man, a man who's born blind. It makes that note. He was born blind from birth. And they basically said, who sinned, this man or his parents? And Jesus said, oh, no, neither one of them sinned. That's not the problem. But this happened so that the works of God might be displayed. And then he spits on the ground, makes some mud, puts on the guy's eyes, says, go wash in the pool of Siloam, and he goes and he's healed. It's kind of an odd thing. And the Pharisees hear about this, religious leaders hear about this, and they're pretty ticked. So they kind of start, because one is they heard that Jesus did this, and it was on the Sabbath day, which is a violation of the law. So they're going to bring the hammer down on Jesus. So they do like this Dateline investigation thing to go in. Like they bring, the cameras, they interview all the people. So they're interviewing like the guy, hey, what happened? I was blind. This guy put some spit on my eyes. I went and washed, and now I can see. And they're like, are you sure you were the guy born? So they start asking other people, is this really the guy that was born blind? So, well, he kind of looks like him. I'm pretty sure it's him. I hadn't seen him in a while, maybe 5 or 6 years. We were hanging out. I could follow him on Instagram, and I saw him. So it's all these kind of things. They're trying to put the piece together, basically to dismiss his testimony. They even call his parents in. Is this your son? Yes, it's our son. Was he really born blind? He was really born, but we were not playing. It really happened. So how is it that he sees? She's like, I don't know how he sees. It's a miracle. Go ask him. He's a grown man. Like this is what happened. This is what's going on. This is all in your Bibles. And so then they call the guy back in again. It's like, tell us what really happened. He's like, I've already told you. And then he says this. He says, why? Do you guys want to follow him too? And they're like, well, there's no possible way this could have happened because this man's a sinner and sinners don't do miracles. And he says, well, look, whether or not he's a sinner, I have no idea. But one thing I do know is I was blind and now I see. And they get so ticked off and they kick him out of the temple. They just get out of our face, kick him out. So Jesus goes and he finds this guy who's been interrogated, dragged through the mud. He finds him and he goes up to him and he's like, hey, do you believe in the Son of Man? And the man says, who is he? Tell me so that I might believe in him. I love this because then Jesus says, you have now seen him. Right, you get it? A little quick. You see him. And I'm the one speaking to you is he. And the man said, Lord, I believe, and he worshiped him. And then the Pharisees kind of overhear this exchange. And Jesus says, I've come into the world, right, to bring a kind of judgment so that the blind will see and those who will see become blind. He's going to bring this distinction in. And the Pharisees overhear this like, what about us? What are you saying about us? And this is what Jesus says to them. John chapter 9, verse 41, if you were blind, you would not be guilty of sin. But now that you claim you can see, your guilt remains. The problem is not, right, that they're blind. The problem is not knowing that you're blind. That's the problem. And we don't know anybody like that, do we? Not in here. They're all out there. But what it calls us to do is, are there places where you have stopped seeing? Are there places where you have stopped looking because you have already sort of figured it out and now you're just trying to cram everything into what you already see? So out of this scenario, right, Jesus says, the problem isn't being blind, the problem is not knowing you're blind. And then he launches in to this. And if you have your Bibles, you can look in John chapter 10. I'll be showing it to you up here. And so let me see if I can get myself organized here. And so I want us to just observe some things. I want us to look and to notice some things. So John chapter 10, starting in verse 1 of this chapter. This has got a very famous verse in it, by the way. John chapter 1. It says, first, I tell you, who's he talking to? And you got to say it out loud because we're going to have to play along. This is only going to be fun if we do this together. Very truly, I tell you, Pharisees, anyone who does not enter the sheep pen by the gate, but climbs in some other way, is a what? Is a thief and a robber. Ooh, terrible people. But the one who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. Uh-oh. Come on. Okay. So, what we have here is you have this sheep pen. It has a gate, and in there, right? Are some sheep. And then it tells us that there's a problem. There is people who try to sneak in and come in where there is no gate. And they are what? They're thieves and robbers. But there's also one who comes in through the gate, and that person is the what? Shepherd. Makes perfect sense, doesn't it? Like this is how I read the Bible. Because you got to start asking yourself some questions like, what is happening here? And then you just back up and you keep reading. Very truly, I tell you, Pharisees, anyone who's not entered by the sheep pen, by the gate, but climbs in some other way is a thief and a robber. And it's important to note. And the one who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and then you begin to see this sort of pattern unfold. The shepherd or the sheep do what to the shepherd? They listen to his voice. He calls his sheep by name, and the shepherd leads them out, right? And so what you begin to see is that in this, the shepherd's, the sheep, the first thing is that he calls them by name, so they listen to him, and then they are willing to follow him. And this last part is really important. He says when he has brought them out, of his own. He goes ahead of them, and he leads them, and his sheep follow him. Why? Because they know his voice. They know the voice of the shepherd. So when you're looking at this, you notice a couple things. There's some sheep in a pen, right? And then there's evidently those who try to break in or come in some other way, and they try to steal, they try to take away, or they try to deceive the sheep. There's deceptive voices, and there's some threat of things being stolen. And so what happens is the shepherd needs to then lead these sheep out of the pen. He takes them out. He calls them by name. They go out of the pen. He goes in front of them, and then he leads them out, right? So evidently, you're following the shepherd out of the pen into some place where sheep can be sheep, because sheep can't be sheep the way they're supposed to be sheep in the pens. Make sense? Like, see, we're just observing. We're just saying, what do we see in this? This seems to be what's happening here, because Jesus is telling this story. And the question becomes, he goes on in verse 5, but they will never follow a stranger, but in fact, they'll run away from him because they do not recognize the stranger's voice. And what you begin to ask yourself, and what you'll notice is, what is the pen that he's leading them out of? And what you'll see, and again, you have to kind of read on, we'll talk about this more next week, but he makes this observation. He says, I'm going to lead you out of this pen, but there are sheep in other pens that I also have to get, so that when we all come out, there will be one flock and there will be one shepherd. That's about 4 verses later. So he's leading them out of a pen. And what he is talking about specifically here is he's talking about the Israelites. He's talking very specifically to this group of people who identify themselves as God's people, as those who are adherents to the Torah, to the law. And he says, I'm leading you out of this. And the way I think we have to think about this is that he's leading us out of a pen, right? He's bringing us out of this place where we tend to over-identify ourselves with whatever it is that we identify with. He's talking about our identity in some sense, that he's leading us out of this way in which we over-identify ourselves and into a place where humans can be human, right? Do you see this? This is really important, because if you understand how our world works in its current form, the essential economy is, how do we get people's attention and how do we get it most effectively? And the way you get people's attention and get it most effectively is you divide them into as narrow of a slices of things they can identify with as possible, and then you make them feel like everybody else is against them. Sound familiar? And what he's saying here is, so in this sense that everybody was against, you can't do this to us. This is the system we have built and created. And he's like, I'm going to lead you out of that and into something else. So there are 2 things I think we need to notice here. In order for the sheep to come out of the sheep, in order for the sheep to come out of the sheep, or to come out of the pen, the sheep to come out of the sheep, there are 2 things that are necessary from this passage. In order for the sheep to get from where they are to where they're supposed to be, there are 2 things that are necessary. Number 1 is the gate, and number 2 is the shepherd. Both of those things are required. Then let me back up one more time. The last verse, verse 6. Jesus used this figure of speech, but the Pharisees did not understand what he was telling them. Why? Because they were trying to cram what they were hearing into what they already think. They're unwilling to notice what he's saying to them. So therefore, Jesus says again, very truly I tell you what? I am the gate. I am the gate. For the sheep, all who've come before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep have not listened to them. Then he says again, I am the gate. Whoever enters through me, right? And this is what you notice. When Jesus is talking about this, he says very clearly, the way in which you come and go out is through me. I am the gate. Interestingly enough, he's going to say in just a few verses later, I am also the shepherd. The 2 things that are needed for the sheep to get from where they are to where they need to be are both found in Jesus. That's what we're observing. We can worry about how in just a minute, but that's what we're seeing, right? Everybody clear? That's what Jesus is saying here. So now we got to figure out what's going down. So then he says, I am the gate twice. Whoever enters through me will what? And every one of you just had a picture of what that looks like, didn't you? To be saved. You have some picture of what that looks like. And it probably has something to do with what happens to you after you die. And at some point, we have to decide or learn what is it that we are actually being saved from and what are we being saved into. He is moving us out of one way and into another way. And he says very clearly here that those who come through me, who enter through me, they will be saved. And the second thing is what? They'll do what? They'll find pasture. Now, what's really interesting to me about this, because I've read this a number of times, and this phrase right here, they shall come in and go out. It sounds like Jesus does this thing where I just get to frolic back and forth between these two places. I can come in, I can go out, I can come in, I can go out, I just can do what I want. That's not the way it actually reads. There's when you're translating, we come in through Jesus and out into this place. It's not about the access to go back and forth. It's coming out of one thing and into another. This is completely consistent with how the New Testament talks about this often. We've been called out of the kingdom of darkness and into the kingdom of his glorious light. And Jesus says here he does both of these things. Two things are needed, the gate and the sheep, and he is both of them. This is what it means by Jesus is the way. He has made a way for us to move from it. He's leading us out of these pens of over-identification and out into places where humans can be the way they were created to be, where we can be new creatures in new creation. That's what he's doing. That's a different picture than what most of us had. I'm going to ask you a question. How is it that you identify yourself? Right, as human beings, we identify ourselves with our careers and our accomplishments and our successes. We identify ourselves with our politics. We identify ourselves with our sexuality, all these things. And he's saying, you've got to move out of that and into this place where there's one flock and one shepherd. That's the goal. And he's bringing people from all different pens into this place under the allegiance of the good shepherd. Make no mistake about it, this isn't like a place where everybody gets, this is a new way of living our lives underneath the rule of his love. It's a demanding thing. We've looked at this over the last few weeks. And the reason this is so important because he says that whoever comes in through him will go out and find this place where sheep are designed for. And I think it stands to reason that when we learn how to do this, it takes us out into this place where we learn how to be the kind of humans that we've been intended to be here and now. Does it have implications for eternity? Of course it does. But the next promise that that comes, the next statement that Jesus makes is very familiar to us in John chapter 10, verse 10. The thief comes only to steal, to kill, and destroy. But I have come where? Right? To where you are, to be the gate, to be the shepherd. I have come into the pen in order that you might have life and have life to the fullest. And how's he going to do that? By leading you out of the pen and into this other place. You see, just by making observations, how much have you already seen about this that you probably would not have noticed before? Like, that's what I'm talking about. Let's let God reveal himself to us. Interesting enough, who is it that you default think is the thief in this passage? The thief comes, who is it? We think of it, we immediately think the accuser, the Satan, right? The devil, whatever. But if you think the thief can be anybody who comes in any other way. And there's a whole way of thinking about this I don't have time to get into today. But this is what we're talking about. How is it that we learn to experience this kind of life? What I think it says is that for us to find life within this over-identification is going to require you to take and withhold and distrust. If you're going to live in an identity that can't support the weight of who you really are, you're gonna have no choice but to take, to withhold, to protect, to distrust, because that's the way life in the pen works. What Jesus is saying is, if you don't go through the gate, you won't find pasture, and instead you're likely to shrink into tribes that wage war against other tribes. Does that sound remotely familiar to anybody? That's what's happening, right? To be saved is to be delivered, not from the condition of it, but from having to participate in it, for us to live in another way, to live under a different rule and with a different king. This is the condition of the world, and this is the invitation to sort of, let's follow him out into another way. So there's two questions that I'm kind of left with as I was kind of thinking about this. Again, this is just kind of a window into my head as I think and I try to process. What is God saying to us in his son Jesus? I'm the gate for the sheep. And the two questions I wrote down is, how do you enter through a person? Like, how does that make sense? And how does a person then become the way? Like, that's what we got to figure out. And the answer to the first question is, a person isn't the way, right? God is the way because Jesus is God. Jesus is the way because he's God. That's what he's saying. It's the life of God, life with God. It's this fulfillment of the new covenant that was recreated when God was reconciling the world to himself on the cross. This is why this experience, this Lent season of just focusing on the cross has been so rich to me, because it's helped me to see and to consider things about the cross that I desperately needed to see. That somehow this resurrection isn't just about eternal security, but it actually brings us into something that is happening here in the world in which we live. So a person isn't the way, Jesus is the way. It's a specific person, and that person, or a specific person, that person is Jesus, and he is God. So how then do you enter through Jesus? How do you do this? Well, the simple answer is you enter through by being with him. The same declaration that the blind man gave to Jesus was, Lord, I believe. Lord, I believe. Those are loaded words. And what I want for us to consider is that what is happening is that salvation, what God is saving us from, is this deliverance from this thief-prone, over-identification way in which we live. The way in which you have to protect and preserve and withhold and distrust in order not to be taken from or taken advantage of, or not to be deceived. I mean, one of the things that's happened, and this is what makes me so crazy about the whole political season, is that you have to operate in a posture of distrust or you will be had. It's a terrible way for us to have to deal with stuff, but that's the condition. And what you'll see Jesus in, it is not so among you. Talking about those who follow him, it is not so among you. You have the chance to do things and live differently. We follow the shepherd out into this place where we live under his rule and we find pasture, like the place where humans can actually be human. And I wrote this because I want to be very clear. In Christ, God's future purpose for the reconciliation of all things has already broken into this broken world. Like, it's actually already, the resurrection is already happening here. And this way of life was created in the resurrection. That means we get to live in light of that he is the gate and he is the guide to such a life. And not only is he the gate and the guide, but he is the source of such a life. What God is doing is he is introducing us to his kingdom and to himself and a rule of life that allows us to participate. But we have to participate by arranging our lives underneath his care. Bless you. We have to learn to hear his voice. You have to learn to take cues from him, right? The mission of our church is to reach people and help them walk with God. Do you know why? Because I do not believe for a second that this is a one and done deal. Do I believe that when you were born again, you're born again? Of course I believe that. But if you were born again and you were left somewhere unaided and unhelped, things are not likely to go in a very helpful direction. It is as we learn to walk with God, to take cues from him, to allow him to introduce himself and to reveal himself to us continually over the course of our lives. Every day to wake up and say, Lord, here I am. Right? It's to be able to learn how to live with him in that kind of communion day in and day out. And he's introducing us to this. And as we learn how to live like this, those future purposes of reconciliation get further anticipated here in our world as we see glimpses of this happening as you and I learn to live in the way of Christ. Now, this is what's important. What is essential for you to be saved? That didn't work, did it? Forget it. It says forgiveness. Try it again. It's forgiveness. It's what God came to do, was to remove the one thing that separated you from himself. That is sin. To be led to live in the pen is always going to owe and be owed. But the open pasture where humans are designed to live is where we are free to give ourselves to one another because we have first learned to live in allegiance to him. To be made right with God and therein hold the hope to be right with him once. To receive Christ, to trust him, is to say, Lord, your cross was to remove from me the thing that separated me. Would you help me to live in that every moment of every day? This isn't about an accounting ledger sheet for you to sin a few times, confess a few times, sin a few times, confess a few times, make a few promises, and move on. He is the shepherd and the gate, and those who hear his voice, trust his voice, know his voice will continue to experience this more and more and more fully and more and more and more freely until we will experience it finally when it's all made right in the end. That's what's happened. That's what Jesus taught. Okay? So you can't do this on your own. You can't walk with God on your own. It is an absolute joy and an honor to be a part of what God is doing here, and for my walk and my journey to be buttressed and immensely helped by this community that I get to live in. What I would say to you, if you're here and you're just checking this out or you're not sure what you believe, it is an honor. It would be our honor to help you take your first steps with Jesus, or perhaps your first steps towards him. We want to extend ourselves to you in that way. And if we can help you, we're going to leave that between you and God in the next few moments. I'm going to pray for us. And if that's you, we'll be down front. We can talk to any of our host team. We would love to help you. But you have to determine, right, what is it that you're going to believe in, how you're going to arrange your life. I'm the gate. All who enter through me will be saved and will find the life that you are meant for. Father, what incredible news. Thank you for revealing yourself to us. Thank you for entrusting us with a part in your work here in this world. And Father, I ask that as we learn how to discern your voice, to take our cues from you, that what would be the fruit of that would be something spectacular, something beautiful right here in the middle of a broken world. Father, I pray for those in this room who are wrestling. Would you reveal yourself to them and draw them to yourself in profound and powerful ways? And Father, would you use us as a church to ensure that no one does this alone? And I pray all of this in the name of your Son, Jesus, who is our King. Amen.